Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining this conversation. It's hard to believe that it's been 5 years since Student Minds, the UK student mental health charity, launched Student Space. In summer 2020, we were all in the middle of a global lockdown. As COVID-19 spread, our initial listening and research indicated to our team that the pandemic was having a disproportionate effect on the mental health of university students and was exacerbating the underlying mental health risks. Many universities worked hard and at speed to provide telephone and online support for their students when issued with government guidance to close their campus provision. However, with the NHS focused on COVID as a priority, we were concerned that even more student referrals would fall through the gaps. Students across the country were isolated, uncertain, and facing immense disruption to their education and daily lives. We knew we had to act quickly, and Student Space was our response, a way to make it easier for students to access the support they needed during such a difficult time. The Student Space website was designed to be a comprehensive and accessible platform for student mental health and wellbeing. We launched a website that included articles written by clinicians and experts, offering evidence-based advice on a wide range of topics relevant to student life. Student stories, which were video content where students shared their personal experiences of navigating mental health challenges and university. A support directory, allowing students to find what support was available at their own campus. And a series of commission services, which included both general support options and tailored services designed specifically for students from various minoritized backgrounds. What started as an emergency intervention has since become something much bigger. Over the past 5 years, Student Space has supported over 650,000 students. It's grown and adapted to reflect the changing landscape of student life, thanks to the creativity, care, and collaboration of so many people, including the people around this virtual table today. This is a moment for us to look back with pride and reflect together, to share stories about the partnerships, the innovation, the challenges, the learning, and most importantly, the impact we've made together. It's also a time to look to the future. As the government grant funding for Student Space comes to a close, we're entering a new chapter, one where Student Space will live on as part of the wider Student Minds mission. We've brought together a group of people who have each played a unique role in shaping Student Space. Let's begin by introducing ourselves. I'm Rosie Tressler, the Chief Executive Officer of Student Minds.
Hi, I'm Izzy Watkins. I'm the Senior Programme Manager for Student Space, meaning I oversee the delivery of the programme. And I joined partway into the process in 2023, so excited to share my reflections from the past 2 years.
I'm Grace and I'm the Communications Lead at Student Minds, and I've been working on Student Space since it was created 5 years ago.
I'm Nicola Mason and I'm the Influencing and Advocacy Lead at Student Minds.
Hi, I'm Dr. Gareth Hughes, and I've been the clinical lead on Student Space from the very beginning.
My name's Sharanjit Singh, and I'm the founder and director of Taraqi, and we work with Punjabi communities to reshape approaches to mental health, and we were a delivery partner in Student Space.
Hi everyone, my name is Andy Owusu. I'm a PhD student at London South Bank University, and I'm also the chair for the Anti-Racism Council here at Student Minds, and I'm also a content creator for the Student Space platform.
I'm Sam Ghayib, and I am the student co-chair of the Student Space Governance Group.
I'm Ryan Stokes, and I'm the senior manager in MEDA, which is one of the funders of the Student Space project, along with OFS.
Right, we're going to start with going back to the very beginning, to summer 2020, when we were first commissioned by the Office for Students and MEDA, who were formerly known as HEFCU, to create a platform to help students find the support they need during the pandemic. But first, can we talk a little bit about what was happening in universities, Gareth, around student wellbeing before that started? What was going on in our sector?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting how easy it is to forget what it was like just in that moment in time. I mean, bear in mind, so we went into lockdown at the end of March, and it happened very quickly. And so there was a kind of an understanding that there was more that we needed to do to kind of support students. And universities were reacting in very different ways. Some universities actually closed their services, so that support was stopped. We had lots of students in halls of residence, not knowing whether they could go home or not, and actually, in finding themselves now stuck in flats with, people who they were living with, maybe not necessarily good friends and things like that. But that became the place where they were living, so where they had to stay. There were all kinds of questions about how universities were going to do end of year exams, how assessments were going to happen, how long this was going to last, whether it was going to affect the next academic year. And so it was a very odd time, and with lots of challenges that students were facing that we hadn't seen before. And I think one of the early challenges for us in terms of working out what we were going to do is there was no experience to draw on. There was no evidence in terms of what works in circumstances like this. And so I think there was a kind of an acknowledgement within the sector, and I know lots of other partners were working on ideas around, well, what else could we do? What could we put together that might actually be helpful? And obviously doing something online was the thing that made most sense at that time, because it was the thing everyone could engage with. And it was a way of actually being able to get out to all students and to all colleagues at all universities that we could potentially create a resource that would be helpful to everyone across the sector at a time when we were scratching our heads and trying to work it out, really. So it was difficult, and we were having to move really very quickly is the other thing. We went into lockdown at the end of March. Conversations started to have as we were coming through April and May about, well, what could we do? I think it was by the beginning of June, it became clear that we were going to take the lead on that. And then at the end of June, beginning of July, where we were given our go ahead to, yes, put it together, but with a need to have it up by the end of July. So again, we were also moving at rapid speed at that point as well. So it was an interesting and challenging time for lots of reasons.
And Grace, you were part of the project team throughout that setup of Student Space, and the year since. Could you share a few memories from the initial period to begin with?
So yeah, I can't quite believe it's been 5 years since Student Space was created. I vividly remember us all quickly working together to pull together a website, making sure that we had support services and content for students at a time where it was really important. I remember personally being scared, but also being able to work on something that gave me hope that we could help people during this time. And I remember students being really scared. So it was really important to make sure the students had one place where they could access all the information and support as well. But yeah, I just remember being really proud of the staff team and all the people that we worked with, pulling together so quickly to make sure that we were able to help students. And it was amazing to start seeing universities sharing our content and utilising it within their communities as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you started there, Grace, with talking about that initial stage of developing the website. And I remember us working closely we had a pro bono support from Baringa. We had a partnership that we set up with William Joseph, lots of focus on testing rapidly with students, getting feedback, and getting used through that work with Baringa, getting used to agile working tools as well. So as you say, lots for all of us, lots of learning for all of us during that time.
One of the big challenges for us at that point was that we couldn't use our normal methodology for doing something like this. So if we were when we'd done something like this before, and when we put together things like the wellbeing thesis, our immediate thing is, well, you engage with student voice. You get students together in rooms, you find out about their experience, and we work together. And this is the thing we've done in later phases of Student Space. We work together to create something that has that student voice in it right at the beginning. We couldn't do that at the beginning. There was no way of doing it. It's, trying to remember what the world was like when we all weren't used to working online in this way is kind of weird tonight, but it was really new in lots of ways.
Our team became actually a huge team, of over, I think, around 50 organisations who were actually playing a role, whether it was through like the governance group or the programme advisory or being a commission service. Gareth, from your perspective as a practitioner as well, what did you start to see was the impact of delivering Student Minds in those initial first sort of year or two?
I think what we delivered was really, this is kind of maybe an odd place to take it, but what we did was really supportive of our colleagues in student services. because actually it gave them an open access resource that they could start pointing students towards. And it took away the need for them to do an awful lot of that work, because we were able to put together content that they could rely on because of the clinical review process that we put in place and the accessibility processes that we put in place right at the very beginning to make sure that the content was of really good quality. And I know some of the early feedback from students who were perhaps a little bit skeptical about it before they looked at it. And then as they started reading through it, we started saying, and we started getting feedback like, oh, actually, this is a lot more helpful than I thought it was going to be, which was really, was really helpful. But also then, because we were working with those other services, that it also gave us somewhere that we could direct students into, that students were able to start getting access to other kinds of help through those other organizations that we were working with, through Student Space, through text, through, the messaging, through, the other groups that were there to kind of support students. It gave somewhere that students could go and get that support when they were perhaps potentially struggling to get it elsewhere, and particularly the kind of support we were able to provide for specific student groups. As the data started to tell us that there were some student groups who were struggling more than others, that we were able to actually then work with some of those other organizations to try and get specific support in place for them that was available online, that students from all over the country could connect into.
I'm going to come to Grace again. So Grace, you've trialed a huge range of marketing and communication strategies to reach students in need of support through Student Space over that 5-year period. Could you give us an overview of some of the key learning?
So throughout the 5 years, we've definitely changed our approach to communications and marketing, but what has really stayed the same is working with and listening to students. Overall, the most important thing with our marketing work is meeting students where they're at. And we were really lucky to do lots of listening work, speaking to students, doing research, and finding out what was important to them and what mattered. We were then able to use these insights to build our marketing communication strategy, run paid ads and turn these insights into action, attend events, and being able to share this publicly as well. We also found throughout the process that students like to hear from students. So we were very lucky to work with, especially over the last 2 years, an array of amazing content creators who've shared their tips, their experiences to help other students that are navigating similar things to them. One of the most important parts is when things were really changing in the pandemic. There were so many rules and regulations that kept coming out of nowhere. I think it was the January when we'd gone out of lockdown and we were put back in lockdown, and there was a massive spike on views on our website, and we really made a big deal of making sure that students had the information, they knew what was important and how they could adapt to what was going on for them. So we had students who were staying at their halls, students who were staying at home. There were lots of different things that were impacting students and making sure that they could find them really easily.
Thank you, Grace and Gareth. And I think during that time as well, it's really important to acknowledge how much contact we had with our funders, MEDA and the Office for Students, not just thinking about how we're going to maximise this funding to have the greatest impact for students, but really thinking together about how this programme could become as useful as possible to all of the institutions across England and Wales. So I'm going to come to Ryan next. Ryan, would you be able to share with us a bit about your perspective as one of the organisations that have to fund Student Space over the 5 years? What were your highlights?
The highlights, I suppose, I'm going to sort of try and reflect it in a way that I had to write an impact assessment right at the start of the project to see if we were going to be involved, because in Wales, there's a piece of legislation called the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and it requires all public bodies in Wales to conduct an impact assessment using some principles. And when I started to look at the project proposal and conduct the impact assessment, there's 5 ways of working that we need to consider when we make funding and policy decisions. And I think when I started to look at the project and look at these principles, so the principles are collaboration and involvement. So when you think about Student Space, it really sort of it was a real collaborative piece, not just across Wales, but across Wales and England, across different sectors, public, private, voluntary. So it was a really collaborative piece of work that we were going to embark on. I think the involvement piece is so fundamental to the project and to Student Minds as an organisation, really involving students in the development and design of the interventions and, the active listening and insights work that you've done. was really powerful in designing and developing the products. The other principle that I had to impact assess was around prevention. And, this was a preventative approach, early intervention prevention, to try and support students for them to remain in learning. And I think, the project has done that over the life cycle of the project. The last principles I had to consider when thinking about funding this project was around long-term and integration. And, when we think long-term, the impact that will be felt by students who have received support from Student Space, this will live long. Students that were able to remain in university study at what was a really sort of unusual time during COVID, and we didn't really know how things were going to pan out. So that there's a benefit there to students around remaining in their place of university and then sort of remaining in study. I think the integration piece was always sort of a difficult one to consider, and how we're going to integrate Student Space into other projects that we fund. But I think we worked that out really well in terms of the links we made with the MUV Cymru project. Your regular meetings with MUV, because MUV is a project that we fund that is also student focused and Welsh language resource based. And I think there was definite synergy between the two projects, how they could work together and really sort of develop powerful interventions for students. And there's a legacy piece there as well, in terms of, due to that collaborative working between MUV and Student Space, the legacy of the resources that were produced for Welsh language and the students are going to live on in the MUV Cymru website. And, I'm sure that there's going to be future communications between students, student minds, and MUV to really sort of work together on projects moving forward as well, and how we can work together to support students.
Thank you, Ryan. So I want to talk about the services next. And one of our early priorities was to identify services that we could commission to offer immediate accessible support to students. We partnered with Mental Health Innovations UK, who run Shout, and also The Mix, which has recently merged into Shout, to provide a range of support options, including by text, phone, web chat, and email, ensuring that students could reach out in the way that suited them best. Through our insight gathering and policy work, we also recognise that students from minoritized communities, or those facing additional specific challenges, would value tailored support from services that deeply understand their background, identity, or lived experience. We were therefore proud to commission a number of specialist services: tailored support for Punjabi, Muslim, and Black students, support for students with eating disorders, OCD and psychosis, and drug and alcohol challenges, as well as support for young people managing the pressures in our society around sexuality and gender identity. These services played a key role in ensuring Student Space could meet a wide range of student needs in a respectful, inclusive, and effective way. We're joined today by Shuranjeet, who led one of those services. Hi, Shuranjeet. Could you tell us some more about how Taraki got involved with the programme and what you delivered as part of our partnership, and also what really drew you to get involved?
So we work with Punjabi communities to reshape approaches to mental health. And when thinking about South Asian diaspora in the UK, Punjabi communities are disproportionately highly represented in that. And so our work focuses with this particular group and ensuring that they're able to support themselves and support each other more effectively with their mental health. We kind of saw these difficulties then collide with what happened with COVID, right? There was another transitioning happening as well. And we recognized that Punjabi students in particular were particularly vulnerable from different kinds of challenges, given these co-occurring transitions happening in their lives at that point. And so when the opportunity came up to be able to partner with Student Minds, I think it was incredibly important that we were part of a bigger program because it allowed us to refine what our offering was, learn from other delivery partners, get important support from Student Minds, and be able to make a positive impact with Punjabi students. And one of the key things that we were able to do and adapt to was we didn't just run kind of peer support spaces for Punjabi students, but we were also able to do that for Punjabi LGBTQ plus students. So really think about some of those intersectionalities within our communities, to think about how we can almost tailor services even further to support those groups who were even in the context of underrepresented communities, they were a part of those communities who were experiencing significant hardship and difficulty, which was also backed up by community-based research we were doing at the time. And so this was a really important topic, and it's a really important line of activity to ensure that all of these young people who are going through different kinds of transitions, different kinds of challenges in their lives, felt supported, ready, and felt community around them at such a difficult period.
It was a while ago now, but if you can recall anything that you think was different about that, compared to kind of other funded schemes that we've all been a part of, is there anything that you would recommend, that the sector really learns from, really holds on to, or also anything that we should avoid?
So for me, it's really important that the program took an intersectional approach to supporting students, because we know students aren't just one homogenous entity, but students come from different contexts, different background, different experiences, and that will then shape their lives as students, shape where they get support, shape where they experience difficulty and hardship. And so to work within a program that was so obviously focusing on overlapping identities within particularly vulnerable student populations, I think was a massive breath of fresh air. And it helped us to share knowledge, share our experiences amongst delivery partners to understand what were some of the similarities and then also what were some of those differences within the support that we were providing. And also, following on from the student space program, many of us have still been in contact in different ways over the years, and it's been an opportunity to develop those relationships further. And so being able to bring people in the right space, connect them together in the right way, really leads itself to developing authentic and long-lasting relationships in this type of support space, which is really, really important.
It's really powerful to hear how much thought and care went into building something so responsive, especially during that really uncertain time. Of course, while Student Space began as a response to the pandemic, it quickly became clear that the challenges that students were facing around things like isolation, academic pressure, identity, or belonging weren't limited to lockdowns. As restrictions eased and campus life shifted again, Student Space evolved too. We knew we needed to support students not just through lockdown, but through the everyday uncertainty of university life post-lockdown. So now, I'd love for us to talk a bit more about that transition, how Student Space moved from emergency response to becoming a longer-term source of support, and how the content and the services adapted to meet those changing needs. So Nicola, I'd like to bring you in now. And one of the projects that you oversaw within the Student Space programme was collating all of our insights and data into the Student Life in a Pandemic report. Could you share a little bit more about what that was, what it told us, and also what you think the impact might have been from that piece of work?
So I joined the Student Minds team in February 2021. So that's after the initial sprint period of getting Student Space set up. And by that point, the team had collected an incredible, extensive amount of insight about students' experiences during the pandemic. There was a huge database of news articles, student stories, students' unions articles, all kind of sharing stories and voices of students and their experiences throughout that kind of first year of the initial lockdowns and response. So my role in joining the Student Space team at that point was to work to kind of pull this all together and solidify it with our own primary research as well, working with Ultraline, to kind of produce that Life in a Pandemic report, which really focused on providing an overview of the key issues that students were experiencing during that incredibly challenging time period, as well as giving some recommendations for the government and for the sector around how to address some of these challenges. So we looked at things like how students were experiencing housing when they were in lockdowns, and as I think Grace has already mentioned, some were at home, some were still in their university accommodation. Issues like financial hardship when students weren't able to work as much, as well as issues as things like loneliness, widening inequalities, and the importance of co-production in kind of coming out of that initial lockdown phase and re-entering their education. So that's kind of what the report was all about. In terms of impact, I think it was an incredibly valued resource across the sector in terms of just really capturing what students were telling us, what those key issues were on a national scale, when I think lots of universities and SUs quite rightfully had to focus on their own local institutions and their student communities, but we were able to kind of articulate the challenges that were happening across the country and what we felt needed to be done to better support students in those situations. As with any kind of long-term, big-scale policy projects, there are still lots of recommendations that have kind of carried forwards over the last few years as well that remain relevant in terms of financial hardship and loneliness and housing. But we did get some incredible feedback from the sector, and still up to conferences last year, people saying how valuable it is to just have that period in time captured as a resource that we can go back to and really articulate that these are now long-standing challenges that students have been experiencing since the pandemic, potentially before then, and really like have that captured centrally on a national scale. So hopefully the impact has been fairly broad, even though we didn't manage to tick off all of the recommendations, as is the case with lots of policy work.
I think also just in terms of that longer impact, we've been able to use the report also in a few important consultations. In particular, I'm thinking of the COVID inquiry, which is still ongoing and is still really trying to answer questions about what is the long-term impact on the mental health of young people due to the pandemic. I'm wondering if now would be a good point to talk a bit more about coming out of that more intensive pandemic period, and when we started to recognise that there were some signals or maybe a key moment when student minds needed to evolve to be something different.
I think there was a kind of gradual realization as we went in and out of different lockdowns, and as that whole process worked its way through, that we started to see that actually there was value in having this and having that kind of open access free resource that's available for the whole sector, because there were packages that had been available before then, but there were packages universities had to pay quite a lot of money for. And so not every student got access to it. Not every university could afford those things. And also we were quite confident by that point that we developed a really good process for making sure that what we were putting up was accessible, that it was thinking about the whole student population, that it was evidence-based, that it was clinically robust, and that therefore actually there was a space for, you know, free open access content that had that rigor behind it that every student in every university in the country could point towards.
I'm going to come to you next, Izzy. So you joined Student Minds during that period when we were making that transition beyond the original pandemic period. What was it like joining the project at that point in time?
You know, when I stepped into the role, the programme was in a bit of a transitional phase. You know, we'd started shifting away from the original focus on the pandemic specific support and were asking ourselves some bigger questions about what students needed next from the platform and how we could meet those needs in a meaningful way. I joined a few months into phase 4 of the programme, which was a multi-year funding commitment from the Office for Students and MEDA, well, HEFQ as they were known at that time. It gave us a bit more breathing room and some stability, but more importantly, it also gave us some freedom, you know, some freedom to think creatively and try some new things and take a bit more of a strategic approach to where Student Space could go next. And one of the really exciting opportunities that came from this was the chance to develop our tailored content packages. So earlier in this conversation, we touched on the value of our tailored services for students from various minoritized backgrounds and identities. But there was also a gap as far as our advice and information resources go. So early in 2023, the Student Space team came together to do some big group thinking, running a planning session, gathering insights, and developing a priority list of student groups who, based on available research and lived experience feedback, are at greater risk of facing mental health difficulties or broadly challenging experiences at university, but often don't have access to support that feels particularly relevant or tailored to their individual experiences. That decision led to the creation of our very first co-created identity-based content package, Life as a Black Student. And that project was a huge learning curve and honestly a huge privilege to be a part of. And it really did set the tone for what became a really important strand of work for the Student Space team going forward. And since then, we've gone on to develop 2 more co-created content packages. And ultimately, the projects have deepened my belief in the fact that lived experience is one of the most important forms of expertise we have in this sector. It can't be an afterthought in this type of work. It really has to be front and centre if we want to build support that is meaningful and equitable.
Yeah, I think that really felt like a new era for the Student Space programme when we started developing this tailored content. So it'd be great to hear a little bit more about some of those experiences. And the first package, as you said, was our Life as a Black Student package. And Andy, it was a joy that we were able to work with you on that. And would you share a little bit more about what the process was and how you see the end result, the kind of impact of that work as well?
We wanted to really develop this resource that would be for Black students by Black students, sort of championing the quote, nothing without for us without us. So stage 1 of the project was really trying to understand what the students' experiences were. It was really cool to sort of hear what the students see as perceived challenges and what those who are not in my current circle or within my current sphere are sort of dealing with, which are still, of course, a high priority. And then some of the bits where we get to see the echoing factors within some of the challenges that somebody within London is dealing with, and somebody here like in York or in Wales will also be dealing with. So it's like, okay, we have this set of challenges that our students are bringing forth to us. What can we now do with it? And it's just about working together with the students, with experts within the field. So I had clinical input as well, and trying to develop something that really presents a sort of solution or some sort of step up or helping hand to these specific issues that our students are facing. So it was over a period of time. I think, how many months was it, Izzy? Maybe like 3 months, I believe, doing sort of the data collection, working with the students, refining our responses, refining our resources, getting those things back in front of the students, and then through the expert lens as well, and then of course through the student minds lens. And it was really good experience actually working within that manner, getting something to the students and to the experts and trying to see exactly what how we can mold it to make it specifically but yet helpful to those students, right? So having what advice students would give to each other, but then having a clinical tone sort of weaved into that, so that it was actually something that will be helpful and it's something that somebody like Gareth might use in their practice. And that was a really cool thing, that just to see that sort of weaved through the whole project in itself, and then having an end result with over 20 resources and having like an knock-on effect to develop these other resources as well has been really amazing to see. And with all these different resources that can address so many layers or intersectionality. So like with myself, as somebody who may be dealing with something regarding like a spiritual thing, like faith, or a community based thing, or family or friends, or even just isolation, and also international students as well, which is really cool to have that voice in there as well, because you forget sometimes when you mention student, it becomes a focal point of, okay, what is a student in the UK like? We forget some people come from abroad and they bring other things with them, and it's also about how can we then make a space where these students feel like they belong, and create something that also feels like a solution to somebody who's not geographically from here.
I wonder if you could say a little bit about what kind of feedback you got from the students who were involved in that process.
Definitely received a lot of positive feedback. one of the most common things that we get is like a feeling of surprise, or it's like, oh, I didn't realize this sort of space existed or this kind of work was being done. And it's a positive thing. It's a good surprise. It's like, I'm really happy that this is being done. I just wasn't aware that student space or student minds were sort of facilitating this kind of thing, because their own institutions, from their experience, haven't provided it, and other places like work or other communities haven't really given a space like this where they can develop something for themselves and aimed at them. Um, so that's one of the early sort of feedbacks. And what they would have gained from that is being able to pioneer this kind of work, and being able to sort of champion. A lot of them have told me that they have become more stronger advocates. They also would have gained a lot of real world experience in terms of creating some of these content elements within the package, because some of the work was actually created by the students. So our articles, some of the videos, the students are joining in there as well. So they've actually joined in and created these things that will go out to then service a lot more people within their community. So they get that experience and actually putting something out there in the world that can be other people can benefit from. And others have also, I guess, even moved further up into their journey of advocacy or work within this field, where they have also joined myself at the Anti-Racism Council here at Student Minds, and they actually get to be involved in something that is working within an institution, but at the top level, and actually getting involved in reviewing some of these things and making sure that we are actually having anti-racism embedded within everything that we do, and actually making sure that all the work that we're doing and outputs that come out of it are truly anti-racist. So that shows a bit of the student journey and what they would have gained from that, where you come in the beginning, meeting a small group of people, having a hello with the awkwardness of my name is, all that kind of stuff. And then fast forward like a year later, you're now in a room with experts within the field, and you're actually getting to contribute and produce something that is going out into the world and being consumed by others that can actually benefit and help your own peers. I mean, that's something that they can tell you that themselves how that feels. But from my perspective, I have a huge sense of like pride, being able to help facilitate that journey for the students. And that's some of the feedback that I've got from those that I've spoken to. And of course, a lot of them are in leadership positions from their own, from the conversations that we've had. So I know they are continuing this work within any space that they're in as well.
Izzy, we've gone on from the work with Andy to also look at some of the content packages. So our Life as a Trans student package, and also the upcoming Life as a Neurodivergent student package. So could you just give us a little bit more insight into what these projects are going to involve, some of the highlights from those that are already completed?
For Life as a Trans student, working with the trans-led charity Gendered Intelligence was absolutely fantastic. And for Life as a Neurodivergent student, working with Dr. Ashley Liu, both times, they ensured that the experiences were grounded in both lived experience, but also clinical safety. And both of them facilitated steering group meetings with such care, and really helped create those brave spaces and helped people feel comfortable, because it is intimidating. I think I agree with what Andy said. The prospect of going into a room of strangers and talking about your identity and mental health, it can be very intimidating. So the ability that both of them had to get that sense of relax and confidence was really impressive, and really grateful to both of them. But also seeing the sector response to Life as a Trans student, as out of the two of them, that's the one that is published at the moment. That's been really impactful, from being invited to conferences to talk about the process and the resources. Just the other week, we attended the Bucks conference, and it was really overwhelming how many enthusiastic delegates there were, really interested in getting trans students involved in exercise to improve their well-being. And of course, those colloquial, one-off, those messages we get from staff on LinkedIn or via emails that, they've shared the resources in their newsletters, and they felt really proud to be sharing such thoughtful resources, is also something that's always amazing to see. Of course, with Life as a Neurodivergent student, it's not out quite yet, but it will be very soon. And I think one thing that really stood out to me is kind of the the breadth of experiences within the neurodivergent student community, which was a sort of reoccurring theme during steering group meetings. It's been a really important project for especially challenging assumptions and making sure we're not taking a one-size-fits-all approach to neurodivergence.
So we've been really fortunate to have a group of students, clinicians and charity leaders guiding the project throughout, having us really stay grounded in what students really needed and holding us to our values. You were co-chair of the group, Sam, for the last 2 years. So I'd love to hear a bit more about your experience, what it was like to help steer the direction of Student Space.
Yeah, so overall, I would say it was a great experience. I think going into it, usually when you hear about advisory groups or governance groups, you often think that it's going to be like a box ticking exercise. And it was, very clear to me, even from the first meeting, that that wasn't what I was getting into. That wasn't the case. The program and the program staff were very receptive and listened to all of our ideas. And not only did they listen, but they were willing to show us how they were going to take action upon the suggestions we had. This year, we had the staff layoffs at universities because of funding cuts. And it was very nice to see how quickly, the staff listened to that and how receptive they were. I believe that was then referenced in a meeting with higher education leaders, and it kind of aligned with the approach of taking an overall holistic approach to student mental health.
I'm wondering as well, because for some people, they'll know what governance is, they'll know what an advisory group is. For some people, that might be a term they're hearing for the first time. What do you really think is the most valuable thing about having that kind of group in place to oversee a program like this? What is it what is the real role that you think that it's playing?
I think the most valuable point of having this group was to hold the program accountable. I mean, the program is dedicated to students, and it doesn't make sense to not have students also govern that process. So we wouldn't want the program to then produce content that wasn't aligned with what students believed in, or that wasn't going to be beneficial or even harmful at times. So yeah, I think the most important point was that we were there to hold, the program accountable and make sure that it was achieving its strategic vision, what it was actually meant to achieve and what it was meant to do to help students.
Anything else that you want to share with us that we can take forward into other projects that we can improve upon, that you want other universities or students' unions or charities to be thinking about?
It's also unfair to say this because obviously it's funding related. There are things that are out of anyone's control, but I think that it would be important to continue promoting this platform to act. This program is doing everything right in terms of creating the content, but at times it might be difficult to put that content out there. So I think that would be important. And also in terms of evaluating existing content, again, this is funding related, so I can't say this is a fault of the program, but it would be important once we reach the next stage that the existing resources also have students as part of the evaluation process and the editing process, to make sure that those, again, because the governance group will cease to exist. So I still think it'd be important to have students constantly involved in the creation and the review of these interventions.
I think one of the areas as well that was so important to have really good scrutiny in was on impact and evaluation. I know that's something that the governance group were really heavily involved with. And so I'm going to bring Izzy back in again now. Izzy, could you share a little bit more about how Student Space was evaluated?
We've monitored website engagement data using Google Analytics and Hotjar. And every month, our program coordinator, Charlie, would pull together a data report from the previous month and share it with the team during a Student Space meeting. And I always really looked forward to those meetings. And honestly, they're probably my favorites because the whole team really cared about this data. And I think one thing that always sparked interest in the team is seeing our top performing articles month by month. I know that was something that the governance group in particular found quite helpful. But beyond general monitoring, we've also done specific evaluations of our tailored content packages, particularly Life as a Black Student and Life as a Trans Plus Student. And that's been really important for us because we never wanted those packs to become just one-off projects, tick the box, move on. Our goal has always been to keep developing and keep promoting them, and of course to adapt them as students' needs evolve over time. A good example is Life as a Trans Plus student, because not long after we launched it, the Supreme Court ruling on the definition of woman came out, and we very sadly saw an increase in hostility in public discourse and across social media. So during the evaluation of that pack, we held focus groups with trans students, and the overwhelming feedback was that they didn't know how to deal with the emotional impact of all of this. And they told us that there was a real gap in the content right now, with nothing addressing how to cope with transphobia or look after your mental health when faced with that source of hostility. So in that scenario, we were able to go back to our collaborators for the project Gendered Intelligence and work with them to create a brand new resource focused on advice for navigating transphobia and protecting your well-being.
Another part of evaluation that I found really interesting was having an independent evaluation conducted by Centre for Mental Health, and then we had some later independent evaluation done by the Anna Freud Centre. So we had really rich documents coming back to us, which really reflected back what was working, what chimed with students and staff, where we could invest more. And we took all of that into the planning meetings that we had for the following periods. Now, as we look to the future, Student Space is once again evolving, and this time through a merger with the main Student Minds website as part of our wider rebrand and redesign. While the look and structure of the platform are changing, our goal very much remains the same, making sure that students can access trusted, relevant support whenever they need it. So let's take a moment now to talk about what this transition really means for the platform, for the student experience, and for how we continue this work sustainably. Now, Grace, you've been leading on the rebrand and have been heavily involved in the website merger work too. So how do you envisage this change benefiting the programme?
I'm really excited to have everything in one place. I think it was a little bit confusing having Student Space in one place and Student Minds on a different website. So I'm excited that when a student searches, they can find everything on one website. Also, super excited about our rebrand, making sure that all of our content is accessible and keeping our supportive yet bold tone throughout everything that we do, making sure that that is shown both in our visuals, but also our written work as well.
And Nicola, students have played a really big part in the development of Student Space. Could you share a bit more about how you think we can ensure the platform continues to be shaped by students in this next phase?
So now that we have that central bank of really strong resources to support students throughout their university journey, our focus is going to be on filling any gaps where students might be best placed to co-create content with us. That might be about a particular experience or challenge that they themselves faced at university, which they want to talk about, and potentially support others who might be experiencing something similar. So we'll be really focusing on co-creating those student stories and really expanding that offering for Student Space as well. We'll also continue to evaluate existing content, checking it for relevance, making sure that we're led by student voice in making any edits in the future or creating any new clinician-led content as well. So we want to make sure that our kind of core resources are completely up to date and still relevant for the students as they kind of come and go in their higher education journeys over the coming years. And we also want to gather students' feedback and stay up to date with insights about their experiences so that our approach changes with them as well. So student voice will certainly remain core to the future of Student Space as it continues on Student Minds website.
Andy, you've been involved with various areas of Student Minds at this point, but in particular now with being the chair of the Anti-Racism Council. Could you share a little bit about, your hope, given, the work that you've done on Student Space with students, the legacy of that work? How do you want to see us progressing together with our collaboration?
So in terms of ensuring a legacy of the work is, I think it's something that is currently being done, which is great. As he has mentioned, my previous role within Student Minds helped to to develop the Lives of Black Students package has now had knock-on effects where other packages have been able to develop. And I think for me, that sort of encapsulates exactly what I want to achieve going forward with my role in ARC as chair, where we keep having positive projects coming out, where it's going to be impactful to the community, especially to student communities as well. And we keep identifying where within our sort of like intersectional spaces that help is required, and being able to reach the voices that can't sort of speak for themselves or are are a bit reluctant to get involved in this kind of work.
What do you hope that we hold on to that stays true about student space, the ethos of student space, as it merges within our core activity as a charity?
I hope that one thing that stays true is that the program continues to evaluate the existing resources that are already there to ensure that it stays relevant. At times, it could be even worse to have outdated information for students. So I hope that Student Minds continues to invest in updating all those resources.
And I'd really like to end by celebrating some of those big and small wins, some of the moments across the programme that we each look back on fondly. So I'm going to get each of you to just share one particular moment from your time working on Student Space that really stands out to you that you'd like to celebrate.
I think the thing that I would like to mark is just how many people have been involved in making Student Space successful right from the very beginning. And it's been 5 years. The team has constantly evolved. A number of people who've been involved in supporting us, in reviewing content, in student voice, the students who have contributed, videos, the services who supported us, the funding that we received. Pieces of work like this aren't created by one or two people. They are created by networks of people. And again, I think that's a key piece of learning for us as we move forward, is that, if we're going to achieve anything, it will be achieved because large networks of people come together to make it happen.
We had a communications intern a few years ago, and they started sharing their experience of navigating university life and some things that have been coming up for them. And they eventually then decided to share a blog and then share a student story on Student Space. And it was the first time that they'd ever spoke publicly about something that had happened to them and their experience of university life. And it just meant so much that we provided a platform where they were able to share their story. And not only did that go on to benefit loads of students, but that was a massive part of their own journey and their own university experience.
Honestly, one of the things that stands out for me is those opportunities I had to talk face to face with students about Student Space. Over the last 2 years, we've attended various freshers fairs and wellbeing fairs, and I still have really clear memories of some of those interactions with students where we talked about, how uni was going for them and how Student Space could support them during it. And seeing people in front of me get visibly excited about the platform was incredibly moving and rewarding.
One thing I'd like to celebrate as takeaway is really looking at the development of some of the students that I've met along this journey. So one particularly, don't want to name drop them, but one student particularly worked with them at the beginning of the Life of the Black Student package, who is a sort of reserved individual, and from a space or from a community where discussing mental health is not really sort of encouraged. And to see that person go from being from a space where mental health is not discussed, but then being able to have the confidence to be involved or to sign up for something like this, and then to see them sort of blossom within the space to the point where they are now actually contributing to content and creating content themselves, and even going out to conferences. So one of the conferences that I went to, they were also invited. Izzy was there as well, I believe. Yeah, Izzy was there for sure. And having the student next to me, and we're actually speaking to a room full of people, and I could feel like sort of the tension of like the nervousness from the student, but for them to be able to gather themselves and actually speak from the heart and speak passionately about being able to help a fellow person, and how much that meant to them, and how much having a space where mental health is encouraged and discussed, and people actually will be able to signpost to other services and being able to help, has been an amazing thing to see that student go from, that quiet person within that room to now sitting on stage with me and actually speaking to other members who actually have, who have a wider outreach, a wider network within higher education system.
The things that, stick out to me are those things that are slightly harder to capture in evaluation. And these things might happen months or years down the line. And whenever we do events working with our communities, particularly events focused on young people, oftentimes there is someone who comes up to me and they say, we were in the online peer support groups you offered for students during the pandemic, and that was so important to me at that time. And I made friends in there, which I still have now. I managed to connect with someone who later down the line was able to help me get a job, all these different kinds of things. And I feel when we try and limit an intervention like this to a particular set of outcome measures and stuff like that, yes, it's great to be able to show impact there and then, but these things and this type of work has impact over a longer period of time that is harder to measure, but lives within people and lives within their stories. And sometimes bumping into people and having those conversations is so powerful, because sometimes as delivery partners, we can get caught in delivery and operations and making sure that everything's running smoothly and we're able to get things done. And even we forget sometimes about the lasting impact of some of these spaces. And I think that was a really lovely moment, speaking to folks who've been in those spaces years after they'd participated in them, and actually relate back to it and talk about how it's made an impact in their here and now, not just whilst they were a student. And I think that type of legacy is, one, really difficult to measure, and two, really difficult to put into words.
One of the key moments for me was around student mind approach in terms of actively trying to get Welsh students involved in the group, which is always going to be a bit of a challenge, but you manage to, find students that were from Wales that were willing to be a part of the student voice within the student space program. And I think that was sort of a really critical piece, to have that Welsh voice in the design and development of some of the interventions you were producing. I think the other key highlight is student spaces patience, I suppose, for want of a better word, in terms of the hoops you had to go through to sort of translate all the content into Welsh. And I know, none of you were Welsh speakers within the project team, but you really sort of went out of your way to make sure that the Welsh language was considered in your program delivery, in your content. The website was bilingual. So yeah, a real big thank you for working with us to make it a truly bilingual resource.
Before we close, I want to take a final moment to thank everyone that's played a part in Student Space. I also want to offer our thanks to the Office for Students and MEDA for their generous support over the past 5 years, as well as the Charlie Watkins Foundation for a contributing grant in 2023. And of course, all our wider supporters who power student minds. Student Space simply wouldn't have been possible without this dedicated multi-year funding, your belief in the vision, or your commitment to improving student mental health. We're proud of what we've achieved together and excited to carry this legacy forward into our next chapter. We are now looking for more organisations to partner with Student Minds. Perhaps after hearing about it today, you're interested in supporting our ongoing approach to psychoeducational content, or you're interested in how we amplify the voices of students to government. Maybe you're intrigued by our training programs for higher education staff. If you're motivated by systems change, you'll want to check out our quality standards being used by over 100 universities, called the University Mental Health Charter and Programme, which equips institutions to improve how they teach, the accommodation they provide, the support on offer, the ways that leaders and their community work together in order to create thriving communities where positive mental health and well-being is at its core. Now, many of you will know it is a tough funding climate for charities. To continue our work, we need your support. We're building strategic partnerships with organisations committed to building a thriving higher education community. When our universities and students are thriving, we create future leaders, educators, and health professionals who can go on to solve the biggest questions and challenges facing society and the planet today. So whether you work for a foundation, corporate, higher education organisation, or are a philanthropist yourself, I'd be thrilled to hear from you. You can reach me on rosie@studentminds.org.uk. On behalf of the entire Student Minds community, thank you, and we hope to connect with you soon.